Hi everyone, I'm back. Okay, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on in the economy right now and get started into chapter 23. Chapter 23 basically talks about national income, where we get the big stuff, the macro stuff. So we have now left micro and we're now into the macro section. We're going to talk about the big picture. Remember, before Michael was talking about individual businesses, individual people buying things. Now we're into macro and we're going to start talking about governments, communities, um, and larger things like industries, not individual businesses, but maybe like the whole healthcare industry. If you remember way back in, remember chapter 2 or 3, someplace around there, we talked about the circular flow diagram. So it's up here on your screen again. You can see that the circular flow diagram had the firms on one side and the households on the other, and that's how they interact. Well, this is what's been happening to our economy lately. Here are the households. Here's the market for goods and services like big screen televisions and I don't know, cable TV and Taco Bell, and they're bought from firms that produce those things. But remember, firms have to go out through the market for factors and buy things from households. They borrow land from them, they borrow their resources, their human capital, things like that. And so remember, this thing kind of goes around in a circular pattern like this, around and around. Well, when households stop buying things and firms stop making them, shutting them down, or being forced by the government, like say in North Carolina right now, certain restaurants have to be closed and all non-essential businesses are supposed to be closed. What that happens is firms stop producing things. Well, if you're not making anything, you don't need people to work for you. And so what we're seeing is a huge number of people that are now going out trying to get unemployment compensation. So what's happening is lots of people are losing their jobs out of these firms. Firms are shutting down, at least for the short run. That goes through the factor market, goes over here to the households, and the households are in turn not buying things. They're not going out to Kohl's and Belk's, and they're not going down to Hobby Lobby, and they're not buying those things that are anything but essential. And some of the essentials they're finding problems buying, like the shortages of toilet paper, and the shortages of, I don't know, at my local store, there's a shortage of a lot of things, yeast and water and bread and eggs. Those are all limited where we are in Salisbury. So what happens is that just feeds the market again and it goes back through and more firms are, shutting down. In fact, some firms that are okay to stay open are choosing not to because it's more expensive to stay open than it would be to shut down for the short run. So as this thing goes around, remember it goes down in a circular flow and it goes around and around and around and just keeps sinking down. Well, on my original one that we studied, in this center portion here is the United States government. I couldn't figure out how to put that on this slide because I got this slide from your book. But the government is in the middle and they step in when the circular flow is going the wrong way. They will help firms by giving them resources, money, tax breaks, whatever it needs, and they'll help households. Like a lot of people are going to be getting a $1,200, payment from the federal government here in the next few weeks. What that's to do is shore up those households so they can continue spending money. Not only are they doing that, they're increasing unemployment compensation by $600 because unemployment compensation doesn't get you much. If you lose your job and you have to go on unemployment, you're not going to be spending a lot of money. Most states, and they're the ones that usually set the amount that you get, they're not giving a lot of money. In fact, probably max out North Carolina at someplace around $1,200 a month, barely enough to buy food and shelter. So the government, or in the center of this, gets into place. They help the firms, they help the households. As households can buy more, they can go through here and buy more. Firms will come back into place. Until this virus is over, and until we can say that people are safe again, however, businesses are going to stay closed. We will see an incredible number of people continue to apply for unemployment. As that goes along, we're going to talk about it in this class. And that's why I asked you last week to get unemployment numbers and inflation numbers, because we're going to see how they change just in the short period that we have left in this class. The second thing I wanted to talk to you about is the value of all goods and services produced in the economy during a time period, GDP. This is how we measure if we have more stuff. Now, in economics, stuff has a value, junk doesn't. So I always talk about stuff. Okay, your stuff is better than my stuff. You like your stuff. I don't like my stuff. Whatever. But basically, it's we want more stuff, whether that's goods, like a big screen television or a new couch or, something new for your puppy, or if it's a service, like having someone come over and wash and detail your car, or having someone come over and teach you how to speak Spanish, or your education. We're providing a service here. And the key here, it's the value, meaning we put it in numbers, dollars, because you can't really compare houses and oranges. Those are two different things. So you want to count up all the houses and how much they cost, and all the oranges, how much they cost, put them together for the total amount in dollars. But you also want to look at where it's made, because quite frankly, I don't really care what's happening in another country. I want to know what's happening in my country. I want to know the production of my country because that leads to jobs here and unemployment and inflation and things like that. So we look at everything that was made in this country in a certain time period. Usually we'll look at quarters like 3 months, 6 months, or sometimes years, like a year time frame. And then we look at those finished goods. Now, finished goods are ones where the end user gets them. Unfinished goods would be ones that are still in process. So let's say that you were making a new car and you wanted, ultimately to get the new car. It might be that somebody who makes the chassis might send it over to the person who does, some other part, let's say, throws the engine in it, and they send it to somebody else that does, I don't know, the outside. Um, we only count those things that are finally complete. And the reason why is you don't want to count it double or triple. You don't want to count a car at every step that it's being manufactured because you'd count a lot of money for one car. So the best way to do this is we count it once. We want to count it when it's first made and we count it when it's finished. The example most economists use are, what about bread? You go and the farmer gives you the grain, and then you take it to the miller and they mill it, and then you take it to the baker and they bake it, and then you take it to the middleman, and then they sell it to the, Harris Teeter, and then Harris Teeter sells it to you. Well, we don't want to count the value each time. We want to wait until we get the $250 worth of bread to count that. So that's finished goods, not goods that are still in process of being made. And remember, you only want to count things one time because it's talking about what we've newly produced, what we have made now. Every time you sell a house, you can't count it because that's like we have more houses than we actually have. So I have a house, I sell it to the next person, then it goes into GDP, they sell it to the next person, the next person, the next person. Sooner or later, GDP says we've got 10 houses here. There's still only one house. So we want to make sure we don't double count anything, and we don't want to make it too big. We don't want to count it at multiple steps. So if you look down here, some of the best ways of looking at something is what it isn't. So GDP is everything we do in this economy that's in the market, basically when people trade money and buy stuff, except these things. We don't count illegal goods and services. We don't count betting and prostitution and, things like that because legally it doesn't exist. There are some estimates that if we did count the illegal prostitution, gambling, and drug markets in this country, our GDP would go up by about 24%, 25%. So we have a lot of trade out there. They're buying something with dollars, they're trading, just like we talk about, but because it's illegal, it does not get counted in GDP. It's more of a tracking issue than anything else. how do you really track that? Like the next one, household labor, the stuff you do for yourself. Like, hmm, I clean my house. I could hire somebody to come clean my house, or I could clean it myself. Well, the problem is trying to figure out the value of that. When you clean your own house, no money changes hands. When you have somebody come in, by definition, you value it by so much money. She comes to clean my house or he comes to clean my house, it's $50. That means the value was $50. Household labor is not included if you do it yourself. Bartering goods. Bartering is when you trade. Like if I trade babysitting with the next door neighbors and they go get my groceries. My husband and I don't want to go out right now. We're trying to stay low. My husband, I've told you guys, he's a little bit older than I am, and we're in that prime area where you probably shouldn't catch the virus. So I might watch their kids for an afternoon and they go get my groceries. That's a bartering. Again, it doesn't have a value to be placed on it. I know that one is equal to the other because I've made that agreement, but is that worth $50? I, I don't know. I've met their children. It's probably worth $100. Okay, stock market. Stock market is the ownership of companies. It is the buying and selling of the ownership of companies. It has absolutely nothing to do with producing anything in this economy. It is only a litmus test or a test to see if people are happy about our economy or not happy. When people are happy in the economy and they feel like things are going well, then usually stocks are bought and sold. When they're afraid, when things aren't going well, when they're concerned about the future, stocks usually are not bought and sold that much. So the stock market is not a good or service. It doesn't provide a thing to us except changing ownership of a company. Stock market doesn't tell us about GDP and what we produce. It is an indicator of how the economy is doing, but it's not part of GDP. And then the last one is used goods. And used goods, that's pretty well self-explanatory. Again, you don't want to count something that's been made once and then sold multiple times because you're now counting one thing 3 or 4 different times. Okay, I'm going to try to keep these short and sweet. I hope that explains kind of GDP to you. The next one will be about how to actually calculate GDP and how we get some inflation numbers from that. So keep reading your book, and I will talk to you soon.